Welcome, everyone, our tribe for Your Backup Plan. This week's podcast, for those that are new here, my name is Tina Ginn, and I am an emergency preparedness coach, a best-selling author, a financial expert, and an app developer of Your Backup Plan app. And on here today, we are interviewing Nancy Glover, and she has a company called Aging with Grace. And she provides family, caregiver, and mentoring and support. And I thought, hey, when I met Nancy the other day, I said, this is going to tie in so well with our long-term care section that we've had this week. So, you can expect workshops and tutorials and interviews on my channel because we talk with real life people and their real life story. And that's why Nancy is here with us today. So if you haven't liked, share, and subscribe to our channel, please do so. We have different topics every week, and I am so happy to be with Nancy today to talk about a very interesting and sometimes frustrating topic of caregiving. So welcome, Nancy, to our podcast show this week.
Thank you, Tina. I appreciate you having me today.
Oh, that's awesome.
Great.
Nancy's, maybe you could tell us a little bit about what you do and how that rolls into where you found all of a sudden your job because you became a pro at it.
I certainly hope so. Thank you, Tina. Yeah, no, again, my name is Nancy. The Aging with Grace, it's specifically to help the family caregivers, providing them with some mentoring and support services in and actually beyond their caregiver journey, because it does come to an end one way or another. Yeah. So how I got into the business is basically my own experience. I cared for my elderly parents for almost 8 years before they passed. My mom had vascular dementia, and my dad it was more about mobility issues, but it was cancer that actually ended up getting him. So, and I did, full disclosure, I lived with my parents for a number of years, so I sort of built in. So there was sort of that benefit to all involved.
Yeah.
And my own experience was, and having these conversations with my dad, because fortunately his cognition was perfectly fine, I said, I know I'm a really intelligent person, but there's times I just want to crawl into a corner, bang my head against the wall and say, blah, 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 because it's sometimes crazy making it. So the nature of it can be so frustrating. Yeah. I used to think at the beginning of my journey that there's just not enough information. There's no information out there. I put that aside and actually found out the challenge in a way is there's so much information, there's so many resources, but my own experience is very ad hoc. Now, I happen to be a researcher from day one. That's my default position. So I was able to do a lot of research. Did I mention a lot of research? and reading and investigating. And I was able to pull the stuff together, but it was crazy making for me, and especially in the health and medical arena, because you were either getting misinformation from two different caregivers or service providers, or one was supposed to send the other something and either it didn't get there, all the information wasn't there. So it's all this chasing around. It is crazy making. And so I kept thinking, and this is typically how a lot of people start their own businesses. I thought there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a better way to smooth out that caregiver journey. I can't make it go away. I can't make it all butterflies and sunshine. It's the nature of it is what it is, right? Yeah. So, but let's smooth the path a bit as best we can. And so it's easy for people to find information, to get pointed in the right directions. And that's going to change over the time, because our loved ones' health will change.
Yeah.
Our health might change. So we've got to be mindful of that. So if we can fortify ourselves with that information and access to that and the resources we need at the time. So that's sort of how I set the business up. It's like a hub of resources and where to find things and that sort of thing.
So you were looking for the tools
Yes,
is what you're looking for.
exactly. I refer to it like the caregiver toolkit, if you will, for lack of a better term. And so that you have the proper tools in your toolkit when you need them.
Yeah.
Because you don't always need a hammer. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. So that is, and then that gives the caregiver a little more confidence in themselves, because then they say, I know what I'm doing.
Right.
It may not be thrilling, but I know what I'm doing, and I feel supported and I feel acknowledged.
I think the biggest thing, because on our channel I have caring for the caregivers on Facebook.
Yeah.
And I can't believe the amount of people that reach out that are caregivers, and they're looking for that toolbox.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the problem that you're talking about is that you don't have the tools and you don't have the expertise in the medical field to know, okay, this is what mom is like today, but what is she going to be like next week? We don't know, but the medical field knows a little bit better of how to work with that step-by-step process, but we as individuals don't.
They do in terms of caring for the loved one, but in my experience and other people I've talked to in my travels, there is this universal complaint that there isn't as much of a focus on, as you say, caring for the caregiver, because a lot of that is, of course, the most of it is done free of charge. They're doing it on a voluntary basis, and it's worth billions of dollars of lost productivity in the workplace and so forth. It's astonishing. People don't realize. And to me, it gets back to the age-old, not only what you don't know, but what you don't know, you don't know.
Yeah.
And therefore, not knowing what questions to ask or to whom.
Yeah.
As you said, I don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
It's hard when you don't know. You don't know if it's a medical issue. You don't know if you should be saying it or asking differently, or it's very frustrating.
Yeah.
What were some of the obstacles that you found looking like it must have been with what you're doing now? Are there a lot of people where they have parents that one is one way, and like yours with the dad is okay, but not physically, but the mom is the mentally part? So
right. Yeah, there's sort of a quite a range there. I mean, there'll be one needs a lot of intervention and the other may not need much, relatively speaking. But again, that gets into family dynamics because of I'll get into that in a little bit. But universally, the complaints have been, well, I think I mentioned one already, was this sort of like this perceived lack of communication between different entities, not just on the medical front, but government and bureaucracy and whatever. It's interesting. I false brag about being able to find my way through the Fraser Health website because it's got about 10,000 pages. And sometimes if you're looking for a specific form, they say it's not there. I figured out back doors and voila, there it is. But I'm just, like a junkyard dog. I'm going to keep going until I find it. And some programs that are available, they may not be available in all municipalities, or there might be different eligibility levels.
Yeah.
So this is part of the crazy making. Is you gotta, you have to be sort of like know everything, which is impossible. So that was one thing, that miscommunication. Another one, which would be, I think, obvious, is just the amount of physical time and energy and mental process, like in terms of taking parents or whomever to whether medical or non-medical appointments. So it's basically now you have someone, and often it's the baby boomer sandwich generation. So they have to now take on all the sort of or a certain portion of the responsibility of the parents' household on top of their own. And if they either have work. I was going to say, if they run a business,
we forgot about that part.
it's like the juggling a million things. So something's going to give. So that's a big complaint. And the frustration of not being able to find information and resources in timely fashion, even though they're there, but it's like they're buried. kind of.
Yeah.
So there's others too, but those were the main ones I keep hearing, and I experienced myself as well.
So is there a lot of help like with the Dementia Association or Alzheimer's
Yeah,
Association?
they've got these are websites and community resource centers. They have tons of information, and I gotta say, 99.9% of the time, the people in these fields are wonderful. They're very caring. They're professional. They're there for the right reason. A couple I had to call into the carpet, but over almost 8 years, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
But again, it's the, oh yes, you can do that, but, or yes, that's available, but the program's filled up. I mean, something very basic like that. So it's like, okay, I can't do that. So now you have to go to plan B, C, D, and E. So that's also a part of it.
Because those associations and societies are worldwide.
Mhm.
So for our listeners that aren't necessarily in Canada, but they might be in Europe or Australia or in United States, they're going to come into that same problem because, bureaucracy and associations and societies don't change anywhere that you go. They're all basically the same.
Yeah.
So how could they work around, what would you suggest that they do? Just do a bit of research with the internet and their websites?
Yeah, that's a good starting point. And it's also, to me, going into, when you're like on any topic, going on the internet, you got to do so, like, called judiciously. Can't pronounce that. Just because one website says something. Now we're talking about established, like, Alzheimer's or what have you. Wonderful information. But it's about doing some research and doing a bit of digging. Now I can almost hear caregivers say, I have enough on my plate. But it is.
But I think they're just wanting that information. They want, at least all the caregivers that I've ever spoken to, they are really and truly looking for the answers. And they might be overwhelmed, but they're still wanting the answers.
Yeah. So it's going to go, like, it's like, again, anything in life, looking for the answers. Now, that I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit, in that they might be looking for information X because that's a symptom, if you will. But what they're really needing to do is look at cause Y, like letter Y. Like, so they might be looking, but if they're not clear, that, I go, clarity is all a big thing for me, and in this process, what's really going on? Like, I'm trying to think of an example. If they're, they have a sibling, for example, the caregiver has a sibling who lives on the other side of the country, who's telling them how to do their caregiver job. And there's a whole resentment and all that kind of thing. And because that caregiver is in the trenches and the sibling is not. And it's about finding information about how can I deal with my sibling? Well, yeah, that's a good start, but perhaps it's better to have someone who's not personally involved to come in to be able to parachute in and say, get a clear look of the situation. Because when you have an issue with relationships, both are involved. There's stuff going on. It's two ways. And sometimes you can't see that if you're right there in the middle, like the forest for the trees, like we're all given to. So it's it can get to the point where you need to have somebody come in from outside because they can better see the picture from greater distance. They're not going to be sort of emotionally wrapped into the situation. They're not nearly as stressed as the person involved. Yeah. So it's about really getting clear on what information am I actually looking for. Once you get a little further clarity on that, then you went, okay, it's more this than that. So that's going to help me do my research and get a better result from my research then, once I get clear what I'm really looking for.
what are a few of the things that you get most of the time a call from caregivers? What are the most common
Common.
calls?
It's just really a general about being overwhelmed. With always specifics like, do you happen to know of a resource about X? So that's fine. And if I don't know off the top of my head, I often do, but I don't always.
Yeah.
I'll say, give me a day or so, and I can do a little bit of research on that, and I can give you a couple of options. I like to give them more than one answer, like look at A, B, and C, and one will be better for you than the other. But generally, it's just like an overwhelm, like I don't even know how to go forward from this. So it's just a matter of sort of me talking them down from the ceiling a little bit, and it's just. I find I just do this automatically, but it's the mirroring exercise. So someone talks about an issue they have. So it's the age old, if I'm hearing you correctly, if I understand you, and I just use my own words back to them, and like, I hadn't thought of that. So that gives them a little more clarity. So, then I could call this person, or I could get this information. I'm like, yeah, there you go. Right, off you go. Oh, can't hear you.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. I think the biggest change that I've seen with people or the difficulties around, is that change when it goes from part-time care to full-time supervision. I think that adjustment is super tough.
Yeah.
It's super tough on your relationship, that if you're with someone, a partner of yourself, and also having to deal with your parents perhaps, or your sister or brother or aunt or whatever.
Yeah.
That's probably the worst crucial time that I have seen.
Yeah, that was my experience too. When my mom we had caregivers who we hired privately come into the house for a couple of years. And at first I thought, what did I know? That, maybe, a couple times a week. And then within a couple of weeks, it was like, I want somebody in every day, because it was like all full on. And then that went on, I said, for about a couple of years. And then her GP actually said, you've been doing a great job, but she needs to go into full care. She needs 24-hour care. You cannot provide that for her. That's just impossible. So my dad and I intellectually understood, yes, whatever's best for her. And I gotta say, it was harder for my father, than me, because, and here's a little tip for caregivers. When that happens, this is my experience. I wasn't happy about it, but we need to do what's best for her. But part of me was going, yes, because that lifted a lot of responsibility off my shoulders, maybe 80%, because I still had to oversee caregivers and deal with the facility and whatnot. But it was a huge amount of work off of me. So part of me was like, yay. And then I felt guilty. And then I realized, that's normal. That's, you've been under a lot of pressure, so that's okay. So that's the main thing. So we go through all those emotions. We feel anger, we feel resentment, we feel guilt, we feel whatever. And it's normal. It's perfectly normal. If you didn't feel those things, I'd be a little concerned. So you're human. You're trying to do a superhuman kind of job, 24/7. Excuse me. You just can't. You can't sustain it.
And 24/7 being your best.
Exactly.
It's just possible.
Yeah. Because for earlier on, my mom had a couple of times of wandering. Now, she never wandered beyond the backyard, thankfully. But for the first, I don't know, a year or so, I'd sleep with one eye and one ear open. Yeah. You can expect that had a really beneficial impact on the quality of my sleep.
Yes.
Which is a foundational piece, of course, but
it helps.
Yeah. So
did she get angry? Was she an angry and?
No, not normally. She was a very lovely lady, but my belief is, and I'll never be able to prove this, that they gave her some weird drug that just mucked up her brain. Very briefly, she had to have out of the clear blue sky bypass surgery. which was fine. So she had that. That was fine, but she contracted C. difficile, which is a very gnarly bacterial infection. This is what kills seniors. But she's Scottish, so she's like, gonna live forever. So she ended up being in the hospital for like 3.5 months. So she was normally about 135, 140 pounds. She's a wee little thing. She ended up being 90 pounds.
Wow.
Someone from Auschwitz. It took us about a year. We got her back up to a healthy weight, but that has an impact on the brain, as well as these little emboli that happened during the surgery. And my belief is some medication she got just made that worse. So she was pretty aggressive for a little while. She had to go into a secure department of a care facility. They changed the medications. She calmed down, and she was able to go into general population. But she was pretty aggressive there for a while. She was strong for a little one. So there's all that to deal with. So those were not fun days, to put it mildly. So yeah.
I think I find that the most frustrating when you're a caregiver. There's definitely a difference of caregiving for someone with a physical problem versus dementia or Alzheimer's.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
The mental part of knowing what to say and how to say it and getting your point across and helping them better understand it changes. Just when you think you got something, you got clear, now all of a sudden you're back to square one again, because it's a terrible disease that just keeps changing.
Yes. Yeah.
And you don't know why, like you don't know if it's a drug relation to it or if it was just the time that it changed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So
no, it is tough, because at least with someone who's just, I shouldn't say just, but a physical issue as opposed to mental, you can still communicate with them and reason with them, and they may not be happy about the situation, but they may not always comply because they're frustrated. I mean, it's understandable. They used to be this capable adult for decades, and now they need somebody else's help. Yeah. That also factors into the change in family relationships, is the decline of independence.
Do you want to roll that into now with mediators that can help out situation as well for people out there listening?
Yeah, it's getting someone who can see the whole forest. Because our relationships will change. This is my interpretation. Relationships will change over time anyway. Your parent can't treat you, or shouldn't treat you, like you were when you're 5. Now you're 40. I mean, it's just, now you're an adult, and so there's this shifting going on all the time, and I think that's normal and healthy. And it's on both sides, because now if you're caring for a parent, there could be part of you, even subconsciously, that says, this person is no longer this strong, vibrant, independent adult or parent that I always relied on, kind of thing. Yeah. Even though you're an adult yourself and you don't need to rely on them in that way. They're raising you has been done for a long time. So there can be resentment on both sides. And here's also something else, another monkey wrench into a possible scenario. I've read this a few times. Someone is caring for, I think it's a woman caring for her elderly mom who's got dementia, and the mother was abusive. I mean, talk about difficult enough if you had a nice, loving relationship. What I did with I loved my parents, they loved me, it was great. We had our differences of opinion, but that's normal. But when you have a parent who abused you, now you're caring for them, especially because now the woman, she doesn't remember, she's got dementia. So it's like, so the energy behind that caregiving, that's one of the struggles, is where are you coming from as a caregiver? Are you coming from, is it love and compassion because you loved your parents and all that? Or is it duty, obligation, cultural influences, or like, oh, I gotta care for a parent who abused me?
Yeah.
There's a completely different energy there, right?
What do I do? Where do I go?
Exactly. And how do I feel about this? Like, do I, some articles I read where someone just sort of walked away, and I'm like, well, for me, that was a horrible thing to do.
Yeah.
Acknowledging this, maybe this parent, and I don't know what are details, but if they were truly abusive, do you forgive? Do you, like, my thinking is, you take the higher moral ground here. Yeah, you be a better human being.
Yeah.
And say, yes, this is what happened. I forgive this person. I'm not going to forget what they did was wrong, but now they need my help.
Right.
But some people may not be in that headspace, so that can add a whole bunch of complexity to the caregiving process.
Well, it's very, very difficult. And I have mentioned this in another podcast before, but I met a dear woman a few years back who had just turned in her 60s, and her husband had become really bad, just like you were talking about with dementia. All of a sudden that hit him. And she tried to figure out what to do for about a year. And because of religion, because of being married, and for better or for worse, and for all of these things that you want to help your husband, just like you want to help your parents usually, it makes it really, really difficult to know what to do. And so she said, it took me about a year, but I had to come into myself and find myself and try to figure out what the best thing for both of us was. And especially for me, as she was telling me the story, because she said, I had to do what was best for me. So she put him, which enabled him to go into a care facility. She divorced him because of, as you know, well, in Canada, I don't know what it's like in other countries, but this is something for people to also think about or to investigate. When you stay with someone as a partner, what do you get from the government? How does your taxes get changed?
Yeah.
How do when you put someone into a care home, how does your taxes, how do your income change? And you have to look at that. So it was better for her to divorce him, but then when still visit him at the care facility. And now all of a sudden, it took her about a year after just to get used to not caregiving, not looking after someone else, but all of a sudden looking after herself.
That's right.
And she said it was the best thing I did, because although she got a lot of flack from her friends and her family. So it's a time of a battle of what to do is best for me, but what is best for the situation.
Exactly. Little tip about if it's happened to my parents, when my mom went into, or was in the process of going into care. So form you fill in, they got to show your household income. And so based on that, they were going to, she'd pay the full meal deals, like $3,300 a month. My dad and I had to go to Canada Services for a form. The lady there, bless her heart, she said, oh, have you heard of the involuntary separation form? I'm like, really? And basically it's they are separated involuntarily. So they would now just look at mom's income.
Right.
Just a lot lower. So she got full subsidy. So if you want to save some money, that's just a little tip there.
That's a good,
yeah. So it ended up being maybe like $1,100 a month instead of like $3,300. Yeah. So anyway, that's just one of the many moving parts that you have to be mindful of.
Yes.
But because my dad and I are smart people, we never heard of this.
No.
If that lady hadn't been there, we would have been paying the full meal deal and not realizing it. It's just, so that gets back to this, not miss, but error of omission, if you will.
Because we're not aware.
Because we don't know what we don't know, right?
So so listeners, recap of that tip would be to investigate, your income and your parents' income or your partner's income with yours or whatever the situation is, and to see what maybe there's grants or maybe there's tax benefits or whatever to look into that. Okay. What would the five things of caregiving, 5 tips or 5, what would you call them?
Okay. Yeah. So some of them we've sort of covered, but I'll just quickly go through them. And it's interesting you're talking about this woman going into herself to find what's best for me. And so I sort of have them based on clarity of a certain component. So the first one is I call grounding. It may seem counterintuitive. You've got to start with yourself as a caregiver. You got to go inside. You've got to, like we talked about, what is your reason, your motive for caregiving in the first place? Because if you're coming from, I don't want to do this, but I'm being a good citizen, whatever.
Yeah.
Energy behind your caregiving is actually going to affect the quality of the caregiving you provide. So the quality of your loved ones or the care receiver, they're not a loved one, is going to be impacted. So there's that. So you have to sort of do some inner work. I think, first of all, you're the fulcrum. You gotta, if you get with all the stress, you end up in the hospital yourself, then you're of no good to yourself or your loved one or anyone else for that matter. So I think number one is grounding. That's how I refer to that as clarity of your heart and your mindset. Number two is relationships. I think we touched on that a little bit. That's clarity of connection. So that's getting understanding. So that gets into the problems. Can be family dynamics change because of the nature of what's going on. And I just put a note here saying everyone in the family is affected to one degree or another, and they need to ideally find a safe space to communicate how they feel and feel that they're heard and acknowledged. And okay, given that, how do we go forward? That might need a family mediator service of some sort. I don't do that. I'm not qualified to do that, but that's an option.
Right.
It's to me, and you were talking about before about, okay, and then sort of after these struggles, the picking up the pieces. To me, the primary focus, ideally, is being as proactive as possible, because that's going to reduce the amount of pieces you have to pick up afterwards, right?
Yeah.
So in the changing dynamics of the relationships, as role reversal and all that sort of thing, they're not prepared, because a lot of people don't want to talk about these things. They don't want to have those proactive conversations. Like, how do you want to be treated if you don't have your own voice? You can't say, for whatever reason, you can't specify how you want to be treated. In many like doctors' offices and hospital lobbies, there's all these documents and brochures. There's one called My Voice, and you can actually download it for free from their website. And it's an 8.5 by 11 booklet, and it goes in like my values are, and it goes into that kind of stuff. And then you file it somewhere and let people know where it is, because if you can't speak for yourself anymore for whatever reason, then people should be able to honor, like they know what you want. They can honor your wishes. And this is good for us as caregivers as well, not just for your loved ones.
And that's part of our family meeting and our workshops that we do with your backup plan.
Perfect. Yeah.
That's a section that
it's a good starting point. Yeah, it's a good conversation because it is difficult. I mean, as we said, it's the nature of the beast. But rather go through the discomfort of having these kind of conversations.
Yeah.
Then something happens and you have a scenario. A lawyer was speaking at a group meeting I was at a while back. He said his clients were adult children of father. The mother had passed some years prior, and the father was very independent. But when they came to visit him, he was forgetting to eat. He was forgetting to bathe. He was forgetting to take his medication. No one had power of attorney. So the only recourse at that point was for them to have him remanded into care under the Mental Health Act, which is difficult to do, fortunately. But that was their only recourse. Talk about stress. So if you'd had this awkward, now, I mean, it's harder when you have parents who are resistant. So there's a whole kind of process you got to go through there. But with my parents, I said for 2 years, get power of attorney. I should get power of attorney. And they said, yes, it's a good idea. Good idea. So my mother was just starting to decline. I said, okay, now. And we went, and it was fine. But like, I think we just dodged a bullet there.
Wow.
This is why I also focus on all these critical documents. Get them in place. If they're already in place, make sure they're up to date. It's going to give you caregivers so many more options and really reduce your stress load. So having these uncomfortable conversations to begin with and everyone's very clear is infinitely better than the families being destroyed because of not knowing what the parent wanted. Siblings are complete at opposite ends of what needs to be done. It's a mess. So have those uncomfortable conversations and they're done with, right?
Well, be proactive is what I always.
Be proactive because people are not prepared because we don't want to, it's like you talked about like different times in our lives. Those are what we call them life stage transitions, right? Yeah, this is life's sort of final stage transition. Okay, don't shoot the messenger. So we don't let it uncomfortable. Let's be prepared for that. Let's talk about this stuff. Third one is acknowledgement, and that's clarity of accomplishment. So you could be fully stressed and you're juggling all these balls. Be mindful of what you've done, and realize you can only do your best with the information and resources you have at the time. Because remember, you're also being based on you don't know what you don't know. Right? It's just you can only do what you can do at the moment. And forget about being yourself. I should have known that. No. You've got to be a little easier on yourself.
Yeah.
Acknowledge what's working, and at the same time acknowledge what gaps need to be filled. Mm-hmm. And that might need somebody from the outside to point that out to you, because if you're so involved in it, you may not be able to see that. Number 4 is confidence, and that to me is clarity of competence, because that's a big stress, especially if you have to do these medical like injections or what have you. It's like, I haven't been trained, I don't know, because a lot of these things family caregivers have to do now. If their loved one was in a hospital, it could only be done by an RN because of insurance issues. But now we're doing this at home. We're doing ostomy bags, we're doing oxygen tanks and equipment, we're doing IVs, we're doing etc. Right? So that's a whole I don't feel confident, and therefore I don't feel competent. Yeah. So that's another thing.
That's a really tough one.
Yeah, it is. That ties into the previous one. Number 1, say again, just repeating myself, acknowledge that I'm doing the best I can.
Yeah.
It's very important to as soon as you can, this goes back to being proactive, is to create your caregiver support team. That's not just health, that's other things as well, but get those supports in place. And then you'll have people you can call upon to say, how do I do this? That's number 4. Number 5 is empowerment. This is what I call it. Clarity of possibilities. So this is not only through, but beyond your caregiver journey. This is to empower you to be, during the journey, is to be an effective voice and advocate for your caregiver. And also to prioritize yourself in as well as beyond your caregiver journey. You talked about that. It's if you're spending so much of your energy and time and emotion and all that with your caregiver and they die, which is common, then it's like, what do I do now? Because you've narrowed your self-identity to being a caregiver. Because there's an additional issue there is what's called the lone soldier syndrome. Because as a caregiver, so many feel I'm the only one who can do this because I've got it done the way I feel is right, whether that's right or not.
Right.
And people who are loving and they want to help and they're competent enough to help, they're like, oh no, thank you, I got this. Okay, so that's not prioritizing yourself. That really leads back up to number 1, grounding yourself, realizing I must do radical self-care to be the best caregiver possible.
Yeah.
It's not selfish.
But
it's actually selfish not to do that, I think.
well, it is, but we feel guilty. So,
Yeah, exactly.
we have to realize that, what's important, maybe lay that out and then say, okay, how am I going to do this? How am I going to exercise? What, how do I fit in an hour of my day caregiving?
Yeah.
Where do I put that? How do I do that? But at least you can lay out the different objects that you want to fulfill yourself with and then try and find a solution for them.
Yeah. And that sort of ties into, and this is true of anything, is ask yourself or try to ask yourself better questions, because the answers are going to be better quality.
Yeah.
Very briefly, pertaining to this is about 8 years ago. I just turned 60, so I was 52 at the time. And of course, I wasn't exercising, I was eating. I was about 70 pounds heavier than I am now. I had weeks-long bouts of insomnia. I had plantar fasciitis, blood pressure was spiking, etc. So I was getting out of the car one day and I felt like I was 500 years old. And so I said, Glover, you need to turn this ship around or you're going to be crawling on all fours by the time you're 60 if you make it that far. So I guess my self-preservation finally kicked in. So I just did little baby steps. I started, joining, Zumba class or whatever. But it were very baby steps, very small things. And one thing leads to another and all the little baby steps add up. So then I started realizing I feel better. I'm in a much better place physically, mentally, emotionally. I'm getting sleep, blah, blah, to do a better job. So it's not selfish at all.
No, but it's sure hard to beat yourself down about taking that time, whether it's a weekend away or whether it's a few nights a week to get some extra help in to have that time to go do something special for yourself. It's so tough because you just feel so guilty about.
Well, something for caregivers to think about too along those lines is if you don't do that and you're like your health is gone, like I mentioned a moment or two ago about you end up in the hospital. I've actually know some people that this happened to. How can you caregive from a hospital bed? Number one. And related to that is, okay, once my caregiver journey is over, my parent has passed. If I'm in this horrible physical, mental, emotional state, what's the quality of my life going to be going forward?
Yeah, that's not really right, is it?
And it's not fair if you're like that sandwich generation. How is it not number one, it's not fair to me for the quality of my own life, but it's not fair to my spouse. It's not fair to my kids. It's not if I'm an employer, it's not fair to my employees. So that's not trying to put more guilt on it, but it's just like, let's we're each the foundation of our own lives. We must attend to our needs. That's not selfish at all. That's
no. I think that might be a good spot to end it on because the tip, to me, the biggest tip is to look after yourself.
Absolutely. Yep.
And find the support to do that. And do some research. But I realize that when you're in the midst of all of this, when you're full-time caregiving, it's hard to see the light. It's hard to know what's wrong with the picture. It's hard to know that you're not spending time on yourself.
Yeah.
Because you get that somebody says to you, well, Tina, you should exercise, a few times a week. You'd feel so much better. Well, that's just like, okay, that sounds awesome. And how do you think I'm going to do that? And I'm just overwhelmed right now. How am I going to fit another thing into my schedule?
Exactly.
So that to me is the hard part of taking yourself out of the picture and then finding some solutions, right?
And that's also that to me that invites a deeper conversation, and again with somebody from the outside,
right?
Yourself or me or whomever. It could be your minister or a good friend who will advocate for you and support
Yeah.
you and all that. Yeah, we have to get out of our own head. Easier said than done,
Yeah.
but it's doable. I mean, you need to have that support in place to be able to do that. Because, like, I'll reiterate what I said at the beginning: we can't do it all. It's just you're just setting yourself up for burnout.
Yeah, but we think we can.
Yes, I know. But support is a key. Support is, I think,
A team.
a team of support. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that's so awesome. I hope that we've all, Nancy and I, have inspired and motivated for you to look at your own situation for all our listeners, and look at what your unique plan might look like for you. Please take a moment and share this video with those that you love and care about in this podcast, because I'm sure it will have a huge impact for what their situation looks like. Maybe we've inspired someone to maybe look at something in a different angle. Our weekly podcasts are on 7 platforms. iTunes and Spotify are the 2 common ones. And our website is yourbackupPlan.ca. Thank you so much, Nancy, for coming. I will put her link down below for this coming week's podcast. We do these weekly podcasts, and because family matters. So stay safe, everyone. And thank you again, Nancy, for coming. We will be meeting again. I know we'll do this again because there's so much more to say.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Thank you again for having me, Tina. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome, Nancy. Thank you again. Sending lots of love.
Mwah.
Bye-bye. Bye, everybody.